Welcome to the Maura Sweeney Podcast. Maura is an international speaker and the trademark ambassador of happiness with a passion for personal responsibility. She weaves insightful questions with personal stories to challenge your mindsets and empower your best and happiest self from the inside out. Here's Maura with today's podcast for you.
What do you stand for? If you're on a path to living happy from the inside out, I want you not only to listen closely, but also be prepared to share this podcast with your friends who also need to hear of it. So, what do you stand for? It's an old expression, and it's something that I'm going to be talking about today, and I want you to hear it on a number of levels. What do you stand for? Let's start first with the simple definitions for stand. Number one is to take or maintain an upright position on the feet. Now, for whatever reason, when I looked at that, I had to smile. And I was thinking, isn't it interesting when you think about the human race? They stand on their own 2 feet rather than walking on all fours like let's say a lesser species would do. So think about yourself standing upright. The second definition for stand is to be placed in or maintain an erect position upon a base, support, or bottom. Now think about this. To be placed in or maintain an erect position upon a base, support, or bottom. For whatever reason, I sometimes think about a foundation and a base that would carry a flagpole, and at the very top of it would be a flag. Now, flag doesn't necessarily speak audible words, but it does give out a certain symbology of something that it stands for. And when I think about it standing on its flagpole, it's very erect, it's very visible, it's very knowable by its colors and by the message it wants to give out, because the flag is a symbol of certain things. I want you to think about yourself today in terms of standing as a type of a flag, a type of a signal, a type of a symbol that can speak, but maybe doesn't always need to speak with words. But whether it does or whether it doesn't, that message is conveyed everywhere the flag appears, or in this case, you are standing. A third definition for stand, which I liked, is to remain stable, valid, intact, or unchanged. Now you could see we're going a little bit deeper when I say, what do you stand for? Think about this. Think about things you believe in. Think about things you value. To remain stable and valid and intact or unchanged. Let's say during changing weather, changing times, changing systems. How exactly or what do you stand for? I want to give you a little something to think about. Have you ever seen someone, and maybe it's been yourself, where they claim to believe in something? They hold something up as an important value or a message or something they claim to believe in, and yet when they are questioned, when someone tests their mettle, so to speak, they fold. It suddenly becomes apparent that their words that they were speaking don't line up with really and truly what they do stand for. So in a sense, they cannot stand when they are being questioned or when they are being tested. They pretty much fold. So do you see again, what do you stand for? Think about you as an individual. Do you realize there are things within you that you believe in, that you uphold, that you value, that you love, things that are strong feelings within you, good things, and those are the things that you truly, at your base, at your root, in your soul that you do stand for. And maybe you've been brought into places where you feel like you have to stand for things you don't believe in. But I'm not looking for what you don't believe in. I'm looking to remind you of those things that you do believe in and those things that you do hold dear when I ask you the question, what do you stand for? And I want to give you a final definition for stand that sort of stuck out to me. It's to assume or maintain an attitude, a conviction, or a course. An attitude, a conviction, or a course. I know I've shared this on many of my podcasts because really everything I talk about is like a giant hologram. You could drop it into a number of pieces, but the essence is always the same. And for today, when I say to you, what do you stand for? I want you to think about yourself as a living, breathing, energetic being that wherever you are, you carry a signal, kind of like a flag, one that operates in telepathic fashion that others around you can sense, can feel. And the brighter, the better, the higher the value or belief that you hold, the more that signal that you carry can be carried along and felt by others. This is extremely powerful for those who have ears to hear. And also, it's powerful to everyone who's listening, who knows already within themselves that this is truth. This is truth. This is a universal truth about all of us. And they're just saying, something in here feels right or it feels familiar to me. All right, so let's get back again to this whole idea about what do you stand for? So a few things I want to share with you. Number one, what I stand for are a few things, but they all kind of go together. I stand for things that unify and uplift humanity. It's not just women. It's just not women of a certain age. It's just not American women. It's humanity. And wherever I go, I am always looking to make connections with other members of the human race. And I am not only there in person to talk with them and to get their story and to learn from them, not only here in the States, but in many countries overseas, but I am looking for them also to share with me. What I stand for, wherever I go, is the unity of the human race. And what I stand for is the uplift, the encouragement of the human race, rather than the division, the strife, and the depression that often is propagated by certain entities that really look to profit off the human race through the idea of division and strife. But beyond that, everywhere I go, I want to remind people of their personal power, their energy that they carry. And if we are unmindful of this energy and this power that we carry as living beings, we can cause someone else's energy to overpower us. And maybe that other energy isn't so great. Let me offer a few things here. This is going way back in time. In 1979, ages ago, I spent a semester living in Madrid, Spain. At the time, it was a very different time, but I learned something interesting. Even though the people in Spain only spoke Spanish at the time, they, as were many other European and probably countries elsewhere, they were all receiving American entertainment. That meant TV shows, it meant movies. And so everything was being exported from the United States, again, from a media standpoint. And messages at that point were being conveyed, in my case, to members of Spain, the Spanish citizenry, about what typical Americans were like. Now, I was a student at university. I went to school every day. I came home and I studied every night. I lived very carefully. It's just the way I always was. And I could remember going through some of the main squares, especially when it was getting late, because we went to school oftentimes in the evening hours, and I would see men heckling, cackling, and making remarks to me as if I was some sort of flesh, some meat that they felt that they could take. And I remember inwardly getting incensed, thinking, where do these men get their nerve that they think that I'm a piece of meat or that I am some loose woman that they could come and maybe take advantage of? Who knows, even to rape. I remember my insides were absolutely infuriated, and nothing I wore, nothing I did in my behavior would have given anyone that indication. But what I realized was so interesting is that back at the day of the 1970s, it was just a few years after General Franco had passed away, and how could I say this? It was a different era. Most Spanish women stayed indoors. Young women stayed indoors. They didn't go out without a chaperone until they got married. That's how conservative it was. So when they would see an American woman walking around town and they connected it with American media that they saw, which was, I didn't realize it, always promoting looseness, lasciviousness, women that were out for sex, ready to jump in bed, that was implanted in their mind. And because they saw it elsewhere on TV, they assumed and presumed, as in putting their opinions over on me, that I was what they saw on television. Well, nothing could have been farther from the truth. But I remember being very much aware of that. And I would always look to carry myself wherever I went. And it continued throughout my corporate years, bringing up my daughter, the way I brought up my daughter, and everything I do today. I am very cognizant and very aware of who I am and what it is that I wish to convey to others wherever I go. There's a reason for this. I want to fast forward many, many years, and I want you to hear this on a number of levels. You can take this message and you can plug the very same message into any group, any entity, any category, and it will all speak the same thing. I do speak overseas. I've probably spoken in a dozen or more countries where I speak at universities, leadership conferences, and again, I'm always speaking to encourage, uplift, empower, and unify. And I also see myself really as an emissary from my own country, as a goodwill ambassador. So everything I'm doing, again, is unifying and looking to bring people together. I can't tell you how many times I have heard people say to me in jest, and they knew they had the liberty to say this, you know, Maura, you really dispel what we think of when we think of the Americans, because somewhere overseas there has been this message conveyed through the media that somehow Americans either think they're better than others, or that there's a certain arrogance in Americans, or that Americans know better than others, or Americans really consider themselves above others. Well, I don't. And the interesting thing is, when I hear people see that in me and say that about me, I think, good, because that's exactly what I'm about. I never put myself above others, and I'm not seeking to put myself beneath others. I am looking to unify and connect with others. That is the power and the presence of an individual who stands for something. I don't preach. I look to convey and to bring others into conversations. But people literally pick out of me, or see and gather out of my very presence, my bearing, my conversation, things that are emanating from me, as people do with you. Now, have you ever been labeled? Have you allowed yourself to be labeled? I want to share with you a story that I heard as recently as Wednesday of this week. There's a very beautiful woman that I work with temporarily right now. And she said to me she was telling me a story. She said, Maura, a few years ago I was diagnosed with cancer. Now she's an older woman, relatively older. And she said, you know what it's like when you have cancer. And then she said, if you've never had it, she said, there's this thing called chemo brain, that if a person has had chemotherapy, their brain actually suffers and can't always remember. It could get confused, it could slow down, and it lasts for a certain period of time. She said, so I was going through all of this, and she's a single lady, and she said, I had to get various things in order in my life. And she said one of the calls I needed to make was to the IRS, namely the tax people. She said, I want you to think about this. She said, most people never want to hear from the IRS, let alone call the IRS, because they always think the IRS is against them. And she said, here I was, and I got on the phone, and there was a woman from the IRS talking to me on the other side. And she said, she's rattling out information to me, and she said, I just froze, and I couldn't understand a word she was saying. And I said, excuse me, ma'am. I said, I don't know if you're aware of this. She said, but I'm really having a difficult time following. Can you speak a little more slowly? She said, I'm dealing with chemo brain. And she said, Maura, this woman said, oh, I understand completely. She said she slowed down her speech. She repeated everything. She did research for me. She took notes for me. She was so helpful. And she said, I told this woman at the IRS before I hung up, not only thank you for your time and your interest, but she said, I told her that she individually helped dispel the sense and the feeling that I and probably others felt about the IRS as an agency, meaning an agency that was always coming after people, that was threatening other people. And she said the woman on the other side of the line had smiled and thanked her as well. Now that's the power, the presence, the energy. And I want to say the things that actually work like telepathy, like a flag would. It doesn't speak, but you feel it. You know what the messaging is. That one single woman who was on the phone from the IRS changed another woman's perception. In this case, a negative and fearful perception of an organization, an institution, and made her feel so much better. Now, what about you? When I ask you, what do you stand for? Do you have any idea that you inwardly can stand for such things that are so beautiful, so praiseworthy, so high and etheric and ethereal? I'm actually out of my own words, but I don't have chemo brain. But think about things that are so highly thought of that when you are up there in that state, you feel at peace, at rest. You feel happy. You feel safe. You feel united. You feel empowered. You feel at rest. Do you know that today, wherever you are, with whomever you engage, it could be someone at the grocery store, it could be someone at the mall, if your state allows you to go out to the mall, it could be at work, it could be on a phone call, it could be if you happen to be in a foreign country. You could be the entity, the living entity that by your very virtue in the way and the energy in which you stand, the focus, the way in which you believe can actually change the energy and the perceptions of those around you. Now, I hope you are hearing me on a very deep and universal level, because there will always be individuals, entities that will look to bring about in you and in others division, strife, fear, and unrest. And I want you to know those very same entities often will profit when people war and fight against each other. But you personally. You may be 12 years old listening today. You may be 88 listening to me. You may be here in the United States, and you may be in another country. It matters not. This is a universal truth. When you decide that you will stand up and you remember and carry yourself with an attitude, a conviction, and a course, and an energy, like a flag, like your own flag that carries a banner of something high and something good, you can change the world for good. So that has been my thought for you today on asking you this simple question: what do you stand for? Now, the next thing I want you to do is this. I want you to take this podcast and I want you to share it with others that you know need to hear it, and secondly, will benefit by it, because as they hear it, it will register within and it will help them, just like the flagpole, to stand erectly, to not fold, and to be a beacon of light and of hope for the rest of humanity. Until the next time, this has been Maura with Maura for You.
For more insights on living happy from the inside out, subscribe to this podcast. To learn more about Maura, visit her mauraforyou.com website, where you'll find videos, blogs, books, and the Foundations of Happiness self-study e-course. Maura, 4, letter U.com, where Maura is always for you.